The Mount of Olives, the second most famous mountain in Jerusalem. This Mount Olives is so significant among Christians and Jewish in Jerusalem. Israel is a small country and its capital Jerusalem, though often referred to as the City of Peace, has had its name challenged over and over through the years. Mount of Olives is the most holy place in Israel. We know it will be the place from which Jesus the Messiah ascended into heaven, Acts 1 verse 11, and where he will one day return. The Mount of Olives has been a silent witness to many significant events in the Bible, as well as in modern history. Also called the Mount of Anointment, the hill owes both to its names to its olive groves. That is to say, Mount of Olives served the city in making olive oil to anoint Israel's kings and temple priests. The Mount of Olives was first known as a place of prayer. The prophets Zechariah and Ezekiel prophesied from here future judgment on Israel, as well as the future restoration and the regathering of the exiles. Additionally, Zechariah describes the Mount of Olives as the exact place where the Messiah would return. Zechariah 14 verse 4, Jesus praying on the Mount of Olives. The Messiah Jesus prayed on the Mount of Olives on the day before the crucifixion. In the Garden of Gethsemane, it was there that an angel comforted him. He would often retreat to pray in the Mount of Olives as well. Luke 21 verse 37, Luke 22 verse 39. In the week before his crucifixion, Jesus visited the Mount of Olives 3 times. The tribulation and the second coming of Jesus, Mark 13 1-37, Luke 21 verse 5-36. He defeated death and will one day rule from Jerusalem, bringing peace to this holy city and to the world. And on the final battle, on the day of the Lord, Zechariah tells us that the Lord's feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives that lies before Jerusalem. On the east, the Mount of Olives shall be split into from the east to the west by a wide valley, Zechariah 14 verse 4. He triumphantly entered Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives, quoting from Zechariah as he did so, Matthew 21 verse 1-11. Later, he would sit on the Mount of Olives to explain to his disciples that what would happen in the last days, Matthew 24 verse 3. The Jews know that the mountain was associated with the Messiah and his return. Jesus spent much time on the Mount of Olives to show us that only in him could there be a fulfillment of all the Old Testament, not only the glory of the Messiah's coming, but the delayed return, the rejection of the Davidic king, and the Lord's judgment on Jerusalem. Christians tend to associate the Mount of Olives with the Messiah's suffering. Jews to associate it with the Messiah's glory. But when we dig deeper, we see both together. The Mount of Olives was the site of a yet future fulfillment of prophecy. Jesus made many visits to the Mount of Olives, Luke 21 verse 37. In fact, it was usual for him to go there when in the vicinity of Jerusalem, Luke 22 verse 39. Every time Jesus visited Lazarus, Mary and Martha, he was on the Mount of Olives, for their village of Bethany was situated on the eastern slope. The road from Bethany to Jerusalem lay over Olivet. After the trials, crucifixion, and resurrection, Jesus once again stood on the Mount of Olives. During his final post-resurrection appearance, Jesus led his disciples out of the vicinity of Bethany, and he lifted up his hands and blessed them. While he was blessing them, he left them and was taken up into heaven. Then they worshipped him and returned to Jerusalem with great joy. Luke 24, verse 50-52. Acts 1, verse 12 specify that the vicinity of Bethany was indeed the Mount of Olives. Immediately following Jesus' ascension, 2 angels told the disciples on the Mount of Olives that this same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven. Acts 1, verse 11. According to the prophet Zechariah, Jesus will return not only in the same way, but to the same place, the Mount of Olives. It is the very location where Jesus was betrayed and rejected. It will be the place where Jesus returned in his second coming.